Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Morgan Haefner with Beckers Healthcare. We will begin today's webinar with the presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Additionally, in about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenters. Tushar Pandey is the Vice President of Decision Support at Strata Decision Technology, where he leads the consulting team in implementing and optimizing Strata Jazz tools. These tools combine advanced cost accounting algorithms with payer contract modeling to help healthcare providers understand the true costs and margins across episodes of care, service lines, and patient populations. Tushar has been published in several leading media outlets, including Beckers Healthcare, HFM, and Healthcare Finance News. Under his leadership, Strata Jazz has earned top honors as the class category leader for decision support for 4 consecutive years. Stan Jakubowski is a senior financial system support analyst at Maine Medical Center in Portland, Maine. He holds degrees in computer science and Japanese studies. He has worked with hospital data for the past 17 years with positions in case management, quality, finance, and information technology departments. He enjoys helping people solve problems. Tushar, I'll now turn the floor over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for everybody for joining us today and taking the time to listen to the journey of Maine Health as they took on analytics as being the key driver of strategic initiatives that were in place. The term analytics and data drives a lot of attention in healthcare, and that's probably one of the key reasons why you jumped on this webinar today. And the reason why is very simple. Data is probably the most valuable resource health systems and healthcare has today. But on the flip side, it's very unfortunate that data and analytics is probably the most underutilized resource that exists in healthcare as well. And the reason is simple. It's because there are too many silos that exist between data. So if you think about clinical data, you think about financial data, those don't really talk to each other. And those need to talk to each other to have a meaningful impact in healthcare. I'll tell you why. So every survey you read, every article you read, every report you read in healthcare has a common theme, one common theme, and a common priority that lays out whether you're a CFO, whether you're a CIO, whether you're a CEO. And that common priority is this. It's lowering the cost of care. That's been published in Beckers, that's been published in Health IT News. Those are 2 examples that you're looking at. And more recently, that was published in the Wall Street Journal as well. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But there are some key trends that are driving this in majority of your organizations that may be consistent. One is providers are struggling from a margin perspective. The margins, as they used to be even a year ago, are not the same margins. Margins have dropped significantly. So if you're above the line, you're doing relatively well as a health system. If you're one of those organizations that has an increasing margin, please do share your secret. That might save healthcare in the United States. And again, one of the key reasons for that being a driver is the models of reimbursement, the mindset of consumers is changing. You're moving away from fee-for-service to value-based models. You're moving to bundle payment arrangements where now you're capped to how much you'll make from each patient that you see. And what is also being recognized, and this is the key theme, is what's happening in healthcare as the industry continues to grow, so does the potential waste and the opportunity that exists in healthcare. And driving out costs is becoming an absolute priority for every health system. Well, in order to do that, and the reason this keeps getting published as a top priority year after year, is a lot of organizations have been unsuccessful in doing so. And because they're not walking the first step, which is understanding cost. And there's a big, big gap between organizations, amongst organizations, understanding what the true cost of care is for every patient that walks in the door. More recently, you must have seen an article come out in the Wall Street Journal. And the premise behind it was very simple. Is if you don't know, you can't fix it, right? Unfortunately, knee surgeries just have a bad rep in the industry just because of people's familiarity with them, whether it's somebody in your family, whether it's somebody you know. But the summary of that article was very meaningful. What they identified working with this one organization was there was a huge gap in understanding cost of care. Organizations just didn't understand it well enough. there is a lot of cost variation that occurs in the industry that's unidentified. There is efficiency improvement and a big need for efficiency improvement that exists. And healthcare pricing and the premise behind pricing and how pricing is done is wholly inaccurate. And that was an incredible summary that they provided. Unfortunately, the articles did have a number of flaws that I wanted to make sure everybody understood. Here, the focus was on a single procedure. And what was not made clear is while this opportunity exists and opportunity was captured in knee surgery, there are thousands of other procedures that have similar, if not more, opportunity from a cost improvement, cost reduction, or efficiency improvement perspective. The approach that was taken to identify cost of care was an unscalable model. You can't have nurses walking around with stopwatches as they're providing patient care. That just won't fly. So while you can focus that, while you can do that with one procedure, think about your charge master just in all the procedures you perform. It takes more cost to understand the cost of care than to actually reduce it. There was no solution provided to the pricing problem. Pricing was an issue, but there was no obvious solution. And there was no solution to tracking impact of improvement initiatives that were made. We all know it's not easy. You can identify all you want, but there needs to be an accountability layer that needs to occur, that needs to be present to track those improvements. Well, there are two steps to this, right? One is, how do I better understand my cost of care in a scalable manner? And how do I understand it across my continuum so I can see a patient through the cost of a patient in the acute setting, in the outpatient setting, in my physician groups, in post-acute care? That's critical, especially in the value-based world. So at Strata, one of the things that we worked on is taking a similar model that organizations leverage on the IT side toward EMR adoption, the 7 stages of EMR adoption, right? And there needs to be a similar path that needs to exist in order to be able to identify cost of care. So depending on where you are in that level, whether you're an organization that's leveraging RCCs or even simple RVUs, there's a step up that needs to exist or an evolution that needs to exist in your organization for you to be able to solve more problems, identify more variation, ultimately drive costs out. So have a look at this and decide what level you're on and set a strategy in motion to be able to drive your organization to the next level so that you're able to get deeper with this information and solve more problems. Step 2 is the hardest one, which we think is the missing piece. So if you think about the United States and health systems in the United States, only 10% have adopted advanced cost accounting systems. Think about that. That's 90% that are operating without true cost of care. But even within those 10%, there is a missing piece. Organizations not able to drive that value because data just isn't put in the hands of stakeholders, decision makers, clinicians in a meaningful way. And there are 2 ways of doing that. Enable people with information so that they can do data discovery and find their own opportunities, or provide data in a contextual, meaningful manner so that they can track initiatives, they can track metrics, they can track trends in a consistent manner. But ultimately it comes to this, why our case study today was successful. It's about the mindset, it's about the tool set and the skill sets. You have the right tools in place, you have the right people in place to be able to leverage this data to find opportunities. And ultimately, as an organization, do you have the right mindset in place to be able to invest in this area of your organization and drive this forward all the way from top up. With that said, an organization that's really leveraged these concepts around mindset, skill set, and tool set really well and driven a lot of action has been Maine Medical Center. And I want to introduce our guest and our friend of the company, Stan, to talk a little bit about that. Stan, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Tushar. And thanks, Beckers, for putting this on as well. Maine Medical Center, a case study, so leveraging analytics to drive action. So some introductions and backgrounds. In a prior life, I worked in the theater and film industry, so my mind kind of works oddly when it comes to these presentations. I hope you don't mind if I kind of set the scene with a place and some players. We're going to touch on 4 quick topics today: actionable dashboard and reporting design, gaining buy-in from end users, training end users, and lastly, user management and data security. So to hit the big backdrop on the stage is Maine Health. This is the health system that I'm part of. It's in the great state of Maine, of course. Maine Health is a not-for-profit. It's pretty large. We have 11 hospitals, a whole bunch of employees, over 1,500 physicians. on staff. And as you can see from the slide, a full gambit of services that we offer to our patients. Closer to home is Maine Medical Center. This is my hospital, MMC. It's the flagship hospital for Maine Health. It's the biggest of the 11, 637 beds and over 8,000 employees. And I can guarantee you all of them are great people. Like working with them. People seem to be happy working here, which is always a nice thing to have. So our department does work with the other hospitals in Maine Med much of the time, but we're centered at Maine Medical Center.
I gotta tell you though, Stan, that's because Portland is absolutely beautiful. I'd be happy working there too, you know.
Tushar, we'll find you a job anytime you need. Come on over. So we've been in Epic Hospital since 2012, and we've been on Strata Jazz since 2016. Strata Jazz is a good partner. Again, I think it has to do with the people. I enjoy working with just about everybody at Strata. They're always good partners, and I wouldn't be doing this presentation if they weren't. So yeah, this next slide is about me. Stan Jakubowski. I'll play the role of presenter today. I've been at Maine Medical Center for just over a year. I'm a senior financial systems support analyst. I have to look at my employee ID badge every time I got to write that. In my mind, I'm a database guy. I have a degree in computer science, and I've been working in healthcare for approximately 18 years. I have no business, finance, or clinical background, none Zippo. It's just what I've picked up over time working in the hospital. I think Legos are great. I do like to build things. I think that's why I went into computers, databases, and into reporting. And along the way, I learned how to help people think logically and solve the problems they're having using the data and information and systems that they already have. So our decision support crew, because to put on a show, you need a good crew. Our director is Tig Monticelli, a really great boss. I'd follow him anywhere. In fact, I did. I moved from New York State to Maine because he had a job up here for me. Frank Isaacson is our manager. Frank is a bundle of energy, always has new and great ideas. In fact, Frank has so many new great ideas that on Friday afternoons, we instituted a no new idea Friday afternoons, where Frank has a new idea. He's got to save it for Monday morning. Angelique Wright is my partner in crime. She's the other senior analyst on the team. Has a couple more years experience than me. If I have an idea and I can run it past her and she says it's a good one, we know we can go forward with that. Joe Gasparone also works with us. He's in charge of the productivity module in Strata, but he also helps with cost accounting, and that's really Frank's baby too. And lastly is me, Stan Jakubowski. And then also part of our team, I consider him, Paul Anderson is our consultant, our senior consultant at Strata. We meet with Paul weekly. He helps us think things through, helps us tweak Strata so that it works exactly the way we need it. Can't do it without him. And then there's some Strata staff. All of them are great, but a couple that we just like to call out, Dan O'Cassis, Jonathan Sow, and Anthony Brown. These guys have helped us through a lot of interesting issues and just help thinking things through. So what our crew does here, we do the dashboards in the decision support module in Strata. And that's a lot of what this presentation is about today. We build a lot of the custom reports and decision support. We do all the programming and maintaining of the Epic data feeds from the Epic source system over to Strata. I think some hospitals farm that out to IT, but we do that right here in the finance group. We do all the end user training for the decision support, as well as the super user. The costing, that's Frank's baby. He's always figuring out better ways to cost. He works arm in arm with Paul and with Joe to do that. And then we also do the monthly financial stats. That's something that's Angelique is always involved in, and she's automating it as much as she can. It used to gather different information from various departments, but a whole lot of it's coming right out of Strata now. So actionable dashboard and reporting design. Now that you know the scene and the players, let's start the show. So there was a desire for service line dashboards. Every year at Maine Medical Center, we set out our goals for the next fiscal year. We publish these goals in an annual implementation plan, an AIP. These goals are sent out to staff and interested parties in this beautiful color pamphlet. Well, one of the goals for fiscal year 2018 was to implement service line financial dashboards that included cost, revenue, and statistical measures. So we needed a tool to deliver this goal, and we went looking for one. The tool we found, the droids we were looking for, so to speak, was the Strata Decision Support Dashboard. So Strata had this already as part of its built-in package. We built a couple of dashboards, but this was really the project that we used to really explore and flesh out the dashboards we were building. It was an obvious choice. Strata already had our cost data. It had cost data back to 2014, and that had both professional and technical. I don't think professional went back to 2014, but the hospital billing side certainly did, and professional went back at least 3 years. So Strata has this nice tool for building dashboards. It's flexible, but still fairly easy to use. And in my 18 years of working with hospital data and hospital systems, you know, I found most systems are on this continuity somewhere. If they're really flexible and you can do anything you can dream of, you kind of need a programmer's background to actually get it up and working. And it takes time to build it up from scratch, you know, months, maybe even a year at a time. And then there's other systems that come out of the box really canned and nice and have a lot of flash, but you can't tweak them. You can't do everything that you imagined. But Strata's got a nice blend of these two things. So the dashboards were a good way to go. We found in Strata, we've built a lot of reports, and if we were wise and built a good standard report set, we could use parameter logic to apply that those reports to all the different service lines that we had to set up. So that made it kind of like in the programming world, it's object-oriented programming. You build little small pieces of something, and then you can combine them in different ways to make different objects. So once again, it's kind of like Legos. You know, if you can build these little pieces, you can combine them in different ways to build a house or a car or an airplane. So lastly, Strata has a way to do multiple service line definitions. So we had one definition that we were using for inpatients and then one that we were using for outpatients. So we needed something that was flexible enough that we could set up different definitions for the service lines. So at Maine Medical Center, we have 12 service lines. 9 of them, the ones on the left, adult med, surgical services, neuroscience, oncology, cardiovascular, children's health, and so on. Those are based on for inpatients, DRGs. That's one of the type of service lines. It's a definition by the DRG and also by age. The other service line definition for outpatients is based on the primary diagnosis. So this group of 9 are the first we focused on. These are mutually exclusive service lines. So a visit can fall into one and only one of these service lines. And all visits, once they get a DRG or a primary diagnosis, should fall into one. Then there's the 3 service lines on the right. These are more defined by the patient's location. So we actually almost consider these service areas, so to speak, and they're not mutually exclusive. So a single visit can fall into none, 1, 2, or 3 of these. So for example, a patient comes to the hospital with a severe heart attack. They're going to come through the ED, so they'll be in that service line. But once they stabilize them in the ED, they may move them up to the ICU, and then they would fall into that critical care service line. So they would share both of those, but they would also probably fall into the cardiovascular, but they wouldn't fall into oncology or orthopedics or one of those. So on the left is the mutually exclusive ones, and then on the right are the service line service areas. So the service line definitions were decided on by a group of senior leadership, and there was some horse trading and lessons learned as they were divvying these up. For each service line at Maine Medical Center, there's a pentat of 5 leaders. They represent the physicians, the nursing leadership, hospital, and practice leaders. So it was our planning department's job to kind of corral all these ideas and opinions and to arrive at solid service line definitions. So we give a lot of credit to the planning department for doing this. So it's, if you look at the 12 service lines. By 5 pentads, it's 60 or so people. Some people wear 2 hats, so it wasn't quite that many, but there were many high-level meetings between these senior leaders, and there was a lot of horse trading going on. The DRGs were split out amongst the different service lines, and there was some back and forth work into those on where they should fall. For the outpatient service lines, those were a little more difficult. Senior leadership decided on using the advisory board's SG2 diagnosis grouper, and they're unlike the DRGs where there'd be hundreds and hundreds to divvy up. There were thousands and thousands, of course, of diagnoses, so nobody did too much horse trading with that. So we implemented it pretty much as is. But after implementation and we started generating reports based on these service line, we found some of our assumptions were not correct. So that was our first lesson learned, is the flexibility of rerunning these service lines. So trading continues even now. I think once about every 2 or 3 months, somebody runs a report and they realize, oh, perhaps this DRG should be over in a different service line. Strata makes that pretty easy. We can go in ourselves, redefine the service lines, and rerun them overnight, and it'll go back and historically reach back to the prior years and reshift everything so that the DRG falls into the current service line, so to speak. The other lesson we learned was with outpatient diagnoses and the outpatient service line. So because we have both professional billing and hospital billing in Strata, we created the service line definition for the outpatient service line definitions, and we ran those, and we were all happy. And when they came back, the hospital billing mapped really well. Everything seemed to fall into the right groups. The professional billing, that wasn't the case, and we learned that it had to do with a primary diagnosis. Hospital billing, pretty much everything in Epic gets a primary diagnosis at that visit level, but for the professional side, the diagnoses are attached down at the charge level. So there was not one diagnosis that bubbled to the top to be the most important one. So we worked with our billing team, and they explained and helped us come up with a philosophy. We had to use the invoice diagnosis for professional billing. So as invoices go out, there are some diagnoses that are ranked or chosen as more important than other diagnoses, so to speak, on the professional billing. And we were able to work with Strata to build a new feed from Epic to bring in these invoice diagnoses, and we use that to map the professional billing information. So our task, should we choose to accept it, give the service line leaders a dashboard tool to help drive decision making. So this next section kind of pulls apart the pieces of our dashboard, looks at the Lego pieces, so to speak, the anatomy of the dashboard. So the first part to look at is the global parameters. We wanted to build a dashboard that we could replicate for each of the 9 true service lines. We kind of wanted them all to follow the same pattern. So we used the process type dashboard in Strata Decision Support. And initially, like I said, we set up a number of template reports and used the dashboard's global parameter feature to quickly replicate these dashboards. So we built, I think, a first one for orthopedics, and then a week later we were meeting with oncology. It was easy to copy that dashboard, change the global parameter, and about 90% of the dashboard changed to exactly what we needed for the new service line that we were bringing on board. We met with a couple of different service lines, and the leaders, senior leadership and finance, and they gave us some more feedback. We built a couple more template reports, and then we thought, well, this is a pretty good product. Let's kind of roll it out there. And we tried to set up the dashboard so that you would get some information in a tabular format, and you can see that over on the left-hand side of the slide. And then we like graphics on our dashboards, so we try to replicate that over on the right. So the next Lego pieces to look at are the data points. We chose on our dashboard to put the volume, average length of stay, opportunity days, case mix index, payer mix, contribution margin, net income, finance per case, and length of stay index. So our dashboards consist of 2 full years worth of data. I think currently we're looking at financial years 2016 and financial year 2017, and then a current fiscal year year to date, and then the prior year's same month period. So for each grid that we put up, we try to show 4 comparative time frames. As the new months roll over, these dashboards change dynamically. There's one system date in Strata that will say, hey, the current fiscal month is this, and by changing just that one thing at this high level, it trickles down and cascades through all the dashboards and all the reports to say, okay, now they'll all update together on the same day, actually the same minute and time. So it kind of keeps everything in sync. It's a well-designed system, I think. So on the lower right-hand corner, we see an example of, I think this is case mix index for orthopedics. And each of our service lines are further broken down into a service line program. So for orthopedics, you see there's a foot and hand and joint replacement and things like that. And then that's an example of the 4 time frames that we look at. So this next slide is going to drill down on opportunity days, financials per case, and length to stay index. So I'm not sure what they call it at your institution or hospital, but opportunity days is a way to look at how long patients are staying compared to a benchmark. So we use the CMS geometric mean as our main benchmark for inpatients, and we compare the actual length of stay for each patient to that benchmark length of stay, and either you're over and above and you add opportunity days, or you remove opportunity days. Our financials per case. This is where I think Strata's a real bonus is, since the data is stored in Strata for costs, for direct costs and indirect costs, at a charge level, it's easy to roll that up into a per visit, into each visit. So we can tell you the exact cost for each visit that happens. So when we do a per case, we can do an average. Hey, if there were 100 cases in this particular program, then we can do a direct cost or a contribution margin, per case. So high volume service lines can compare to lower volume service lines. It kind of balances out that metric. The last one to talk about is the length to stay index, and this again has to do with that benchmark length to stay compared to actual length to stay. And what we do here, and it was taught to us by case management, actually, they came and said, hey, those opportunity days are good and the average length to stay is good, but can you do this calculation? And it's a simple ratio of the actual days to the benchmark days, and you want to be near 1. So the higher you are above 1, the longer you're keeping your patients over the benchmark. And if you're slightly below 1, you're moving your patients out quicker. That's great. You don't want to be too much below 1, because then you got to start looking at readmissions. Maybe you're moving them out too quick. All 3 of these things we were able to build as measures in Strata Decision Support. And we give Paul a lot of credit for helping us think this through and build these, as well as a whole bunch of others that he's helped us with over time. The last part of the dashboard anatomy, the last Lego to look at, is the links to reports. So we tried to do a standardized dashboard for those 9 service lines, but we had to customize it some way. So to customize the dashboards, we used the links to drill down. So this is twofold. We can do a custom report on surgeries that the adult medicine group might not care about, but certainly orthopedics and surgical services and cardiothoracic would want that. It also gives us a way to give the end user, the dashboard, a way to drill down to the actual visit level data. We don't have PHI in there, but we do have visit level account numbers. So this is a transparency thing. If there's a number on the dashboard that someone is curious about and they want to get deeper into it, they can click on one of these drill down reports, just adjust the parameters a little bit, and then they can extract those actual visits. So build it and they will come. Well, our rollout plan, we had formal kickoff meetings with each of the service lines and their leadership. In the dashboard, we were pretty proud of it. We'd collect it all in one place. A lot of the metrics that, yes, the leaders could have found in various and sundry other systems and supports, but now we had them all in one place. And what was new is we could show the contribution margin and the net income calculated using the direct and indirect costs that's already in Strata. I think they had cost data prior to that, but it was kind of at a department level, not at a patient level or a service line level, and it was hard to do anything with. But now it was flexible enough that you could cut and slice it different ways. So we had a useful tool that also had something new. So we thought, oh, wow, they're going to love this. So we found we needed some allies, though. The formal meetings were good. Everyone was polite. There may have been some skepticism. We found no one ran out and started using these dashboards. So like I said, we needed allies. We partnered with a few of the service line leaders that seemed most interested. We would meet with them for half an hour or an hour on a weekly basis, and they started to see value in the data and started to trust it. And they started to see Strata as a good reporting tool, and in our department as builders. The SLEC. So the turning point was actually the SLEC. The service line leaders participate in a monthly meeting. It's called the Service Line Executive Committee, or the SLEC. It's a terrible name, I know. The leaders we partnered with initially started to use the reports and charts from their Strata dashboards in their monthly presentations. So they didn't have analysts building this. The VPs themselves, and some of them were clinical VPs, started just using a cut and paste tool to put these into presentations, or just bring Strata up during the meeting and show where they were at. So this became interesting to all of the service line leaders. So here's an example of two data charts that they would use in the select meeting. So the top one is just by the 9 major service lines there, what the outpatient contribution, combining hospital and professional billing there. So you can see who's making money and who's maybe not. And it's a quick way to compare service line to service line. Down below is actually a per case breakdown of the total cost or the direct cost and the average length of stay by those service lines. So our upper level management, our C-suite, really liked this view because it kind of cut across, and high level, high volume service lines and low volume service lines, it was a good comparable way to look at them. So this success got the ball rolling. We started to meet more and more frequently with all the service line leaders. They became more and more familiar with the dashboards and the reports. With many of the leaders, we continue to meet weekly or biweekly. These standing half-hour meetings are about the data and reports, but we find it's also about building a relationship. We need to understand their goals and what they're trying to do, and they also gain an understanding of what we can and cannot build in Strata and where we're going. So, and the dashboards were great at this high level, but as we had these meetings and started working with the service line leaders, we began to do more and more drill down and special study reports. So the first example of a special study we did for the service lines was the single spine fusion study for neuroscience. We actually worked directly with the neurosurgeons and the service line leaders to kind of find a homogeneous group of patients that had similar surgeries. We drilled down on the cost of each visit, and we determined that one of the major drivers of direct costs was the implant items used. We also looked at length of stay and OR surgery times. So the chart on the slide actually breaks things down by neurosurgeon and what implant items they were using on average for the cases that they were doing. So this showed some variability in that as well. So this was always a cool thing for me to do. I learned a lot about spine surgery, and I think of the implants over there on the left, the spacers, the rods, the cages, and the screws as the Lego items that the docs are using to rebuild their spines. So the goal of the study was to see if contribution margin went up and direct costs went down from fiscal year 17 to fiscal year 18. During that 2-year time frame here, a number of things changed. Our procurement department was working with vendors on contracts to standardize all the prices for the implant items. So if one doc preferred this spacer or screw and another doc preferred a different, the procurement department was trying to get those costs in line so that they would all be similar or that the docs would change and use the more economical items, so to speak. The procurement department was very successful at this. So this lowered supply costs, and we were able to show that in Strata reports. We also looked at length of stay and the day of discharge and found that some surgeons were discharging many of their inpatients on day one, but some of the surgeons were not. And this was actually a surprise to the surgeons that were not discharging on day one. They wanted to know how this was possible. So there was a great discussion in the meeting between the surgeons, and so ensued. But now all of the surgeons discharge some of their patients on day one, and certainly most of them move out days 2 and 3. This lowered length of stay and therefore lowered the overall direct cost. So these two things and a couple other changes helped direct costs to go down, and therefore contribution margin went up. So the next example of a special study that we're currently doing is for the adult medicine service line. It's inpatient pneumonia study. For this one, we're working with hospitalists and the service line leaders, and we're specifically examining the cost/clinical care relationships. And this study is still in progress, so no real conclusions yet, but as a first step, we drilled down once again on the cost for this group of patients, and we found that the majority of the cost was coming from room and board, so this is leading us to drill down more on length of stay and see what the variability is there. Some of the other data points that we're looking at are the day of stay that a chest x-ray was performed and how many were done, and the day of stay that lab cultures are done and how many. So we're trying to determine if there's overutilization of certain tests, or if maybe scheduling tests earlier in the stay could help improve the average length of stay. So from the slide down the left, you see the days of stay, and then we're getting a count of cases and the number of units that were done, and then also the direct cost for those. And then I think this one was for the x-ray utilization. Earlier I mentioned that we had 12 service lines, but I split those 3 into a special group that are more service area based. They didn't quite fit the pattern. Those were critical care, ED and urgent care, and lastly, primary care. We used executive style dashboards in Strata to build these. It was just after the upgrade. I think the executive style was brand new. We wanted to give them a try. And each of these dashboards were custom because the definition didn't fit the pattern. We had to build them all from scratch, and the executive style looked like the way to go on this one. So here on this slide, we see an example of the ED and urgent care dashboard. The service line leaders and the nurse leaders and the physicians here like to slice the data in a lot of different ways. So this dashboard has really kind of grown. I think it's over 40 tiles now, sliced in a lot of different ways, and it's very colorful. They like graphs. So this is an example of partnering with our end users, catering to them in effect, and building a relationship to give them the tools that they need. So this group, it really likes the different possible combinations of the data points. So they're grouping by same data point, by pair, and then by level code, and then by discharge disposition. And that's all right there at the touch of their fingers in the graphs. We have other users that prefer more visit level drill down, and so we'll prepare a drill down that has all the important data points that they can shoot to Excel, and then they do the kind of slicing and grouping themselves. But different types of users prefer different types of things. So next section is about training for end users for self-service. So at Maine Medical Center and Maine Health, we basically have 2 categories of users. There's a basic user and then the super user. The basic user training, it's pretty straightforward. We send out a Word, once somebody gets signed up for Strata Decision Support, we send out a Word document and it just has simple instructions with screenshots. It focuses on accessing and running reports, changing the default parameters, and that gives them the ability to do some self-service. If a report is built wisely with good parameters, they can do a lot with it. It teaches them how to pull up dashboards and utilize those, and then the exporting of data to Excel, either exporting the actual data you see or the export flat to get the visit level data. We teach them that as well. We try to meet with each basic user and walk them through the Strata platform and answer any questions they have. And then this lays a good foundation for building two-way communication, and it works for us. Super user training. So super users get an extensive training. We actually treat them as if they're part of our team. We like for them to come hotel in our office for a few half days. If it's 12, 16, 20 hours spread out over 2 or 3 weeks, we think that's the best way to train. We work on understanding the data in Strata and how it's organized. They build a number of reports with us, so they get a good feel of how the report design software works. It's great when they come with a project from their department or area, but if they don't, we always have a lot of requests, and we can always use an extra set of hands, so we do that. This builds a strong relationship between us and our super users. Folks in our department are continually working with them down the road. They know they can contact us for info or advice about complicated reports or about things they're just trying to think through. We also rely on them once they've returned to their locations or departments or other hospitals. If we get a request from that area, we can reach back to these super users and use their input or actually help them do the work along with our guidance. And we also find a good network of super users helps us with our basic user population as well. So user management and data security. So we use the security groups in Strata for our user management and data security. As a new user is added into the decision support module, we place the user in existing groups that already have reports and dashboards that they requested. Occasionally, we have to build new security groups as needed. If a new department comes in or somebody with needs a new security level, we can do that. It takes a little time up front to build the user groups, but maintenance and upkeep are easier down the road. So think of it like this. As a group builds a library of reports, adding new users to the group is a lot faster than going through and adding an individual user to each individual report. So here's an example of the Strata security groups. If you're not currently using these and you're a Strata team, check them out. They're incredibly helpful. So in lessons we've learned a little bit along the way with dashboards and report security, if you build a dashboard and set security on that dashboard, you need to give similar security to all the underlying reports and the drill downs. It makes things much smoother, but setting up the security groups in the right way makes this fairly easy. So here's an example of two reports and security. The one on the left is our best practice. It's as just groups added to the security of the report. The one on the right, not so good. It has a couple of groups, but it's got individual users too. So say somebody comes and they're a brand new user and they say, hey, I need the same report access as Chris or Chris's group. I can go look up Chris and say, oh, he's in all these groups and add the person to those. But if Chris is only added to reports as an individual user, it's a lot harder to figure out where to put that user. I suppose I could go look over Chris's shoulder and see what reports he has, but that's definitely not the most efficient way of doing it. So that's pretty much my section of the presentation. I'm going to hand this back over to Tushar.
Yeah, Dan, just a couple of things for you. Obviously, one, thank you for sharing that. You guys have done some pretty phenomenal work there and getting the data in the hands of people. So if we try to relate that back to the tool set, skill set, mindset approach, you know, you selected the tool set, and I think your recommendation was there. It's flashy is not necessarily the way to go. You want to find the balance between flashy analytics to flexible analytics that are meaningful, and where financial data set is usually the way to go. Just from where to have a presentation layer from a reporting perspective. Is that correct kind of summary of what you were saying?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, you know, the tool's flexible enough, but you can still spin up a dashboard in a day or two. It doesn't take that much. So that's about right. It's a good tool for that.
And I think from a mindset perspective, I think that's kind of, for me personally, was the most eye-opening one for you, because organizations struggle organizations have had analytic tools available for a while, have had clinical data at least available for a while, but have really struggled to get adoption. Right? It becomes, somebody has a question, maybe they get an answer via some form of data support mechanism. But the approach that you guys took just from a getting physician buy-in standpoint was pretty phenomenal. Starting with a few and then letting them sell it for you versus you having to go out to everybody.
I think that's right. And also getting their buy-in early on with, helping them or using them and their knowledge to help come up with the definitions of the service lines. Got their buy-in early on that process.
Got it. And so if I was an organization trying to go out and take a similar journey, are there specific service lines you'd advise me to go after that are more familiar with information like this than others? Or
not necessarily. It's more a relationship type of thing. You got to judge your service line leaders on who they are. If somebody's good with data or interested in data, if they like working with spreadsheets, that's a different type of person than somebody who likes to have things in graphs but can't quite get there themselves and needs your help. So it's more a person-to-person relationship to figure out who the ally should be. I can't say all orthopedic guys are good with data, but
yeah. Got it. And then just from building the skill set, obviously some of the service line leadership is clinical and may not have as much familiarity to financial data or financial metrics. Is there something specific you guys did around that area to build a knowledge base and at least defining what a contribution margin is and how that information should be used?
Yeah, so we have kind of, when we talk about cost or introduce the cost data points to people, Frank Isaacson has kind of put together a little presentation. I think it's just Excel, and he hands it out, and it brings it down to the basic points of, hey, this is what goes into direct cost, and this is what goes into indirect cost, and it brings it down, to a level that anybody can understand. Like I said, I'm not a finance guy, but when they explain it to me, it makes sense.
So I think, I think an important point for the audience is it's not just about training on the tool or access on the tool. There needs to be supplementary training that needs to be provided, or information that needs to be provided, so you can start developing a financial intuition for clinical folks to understand this information. So that could be a cost accounting boot camp, that could be a finance overview of how finance works, or how cost accounting drives decisions, or how cost accounting drives finances in an organization is critical. And then one last question for me, and then I'm going to hand it to the audience. Just as you think about, evolution of since where you've come from the beginning, how have you maintained that level of engagement with clinicians or with service line leaders, and how are you continuing to evolve these dashboards?
So I think that has to do with the standing meetings. Any service line that we meet with once every 2 weeks, half hour in, and that just builds that relationship as it goes. They'll look at the high level and say, okay, let's try to concentrate on this program or that program, and then that kind of leads into the next drill down, the next study that we'll do. So I think really that's an interpersonal thing. Our department likes to get out there and interact.
Perfect. And then one last question, I promise I lied. Just as far as the demand for this, right? So there is, as people become aware of, how to use contribution margin to drive a decision, whether it's from a physician recruitment perspective or service line growth standpoint, the demand is continuing to increase and more folks get access to this, right? Or hear about this. And you've had a pretty steady stream of FTEs. It's not like you're continuing to hire 10 FTEs to do analytics. How are you prioritizing, or how are you addressing the need with the limited resources you guys have in this space?
I'm not the manager, so I don't know all the requests they're getting, but I think we've done okay. I think our lag time gets a little longer sometimes with a certain study, or we say, oh, let's get to that next. But at Maine Medical Center, maybe it's a Maine state thing, but most people are pretty practical. They know if you're real busy or not real busy, and to prioritize what they're doing. So even the service line leaders say, oh, we got these 10 things we want to do, but let's rank them so that we have a 1, 2, 3 that we'll do first. So
Got it.
It's the practicality of the folks here, I think.
Got it. And one of the things I like what you're doing, as well as a number of other organizations, is this concept of kind of empowering other users to be able to contribute to the cause. So just like you, as you're developing a big base of super users who can do their own data discovery and their own analytics, what that does is expands that power or empowers others to be able to create things like that for people they work for or audiences they think is necessary. So I think you guys having a really good balance between who's a super user and who's an end user. So who can pull data versus whose data getting pushed to is a really good balance. I think, at least in my mind, helps address some of the future resource constraints that you may have.
That's true. And the education piece is kind of spinning out too, where we're training users. We train the head of case management on how to use Strata. And, she has a library of about 20 reports, and she went around to all the nursing directors and nurse managers and taught them how to use them. So, she kind of took that yoke off of us of education, which we appreciate a lot. So
that's fantastic.
It grows. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Dan. I'm not going to take any more of your time. I know a number of our audience members have a few questions.
Thanks,
so Becca's team, I'll hand over to you for the questions.
Thank you to Sharon and Stan for that fantastic presentation. We will now begin today's question and answer session. Please submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled "Enter a question for staff" and clicking "Send." We'll try to get through as many questions as we have time for, and there are quite a few questions coming in today. And so first I'll ask from an audience member, how did you group the diagnoses into service lines?
I'll take that one. So for inpatient, we grouped by the DRGs, and that was the planning group got together with the service line leaders, and I think they just went through the list of DRGs and said, okay, DRG 1, you go here, DRG 5, you go there, DRG 15, you go there. And that was kind of that horse trade slide that I talked about. But for the outpatients, you don't have DRGs, so we had to use the diagnosis codes, the primary diagnosis code. And it's the planning committee worked with the advisory board, and they, I think, purchased what's called the SG2 grouper. So I think that's a nationally known grouping of diagnosis codes, which they update, I think, every year or maybe even twice or 3 times a year. So that's, for the outpatient side, it was that standard diagnosis grouping.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is there are a number of other, if you don't want to take the initiative or the effort, which is a significant effort given how many ICD-10s there are a number of third-party groupings that are available to your organization. The key is getting the buy-in of your service line leaders, right? So I think especially if you go to a standardized industry standard service line approach, organizations are more receptive to that. I think that strategy played out perfectly at Maine. Thank you, Stan.
And as long as it's, a visit-based definition, Strata already has a way to put that definition into Strata, and it works on any new patient that comes through. It gets mapped.
Thank you both for explaining that. We have another audience member who is wondering, what is your formula for determining contribution margin? Is it reimbursement minus direct cost?
Yeah, we do that, but it's not straight reimbursement. I think we use a kind of a blended, where if the balance on the account is less than $100, we take the actual dollars paid. But if it's more than $100, then we do an estimate. We have that contract analytics that does an estimate of what we expect to be paid. So we use that estimated payment, and we blend the two into what's called a net revenue. And then we use that along with the indirect or direct cost to come up with contribution margin or net income. That makes sense?
Yeah. Yep, and I think what's key there is leveraging a current net revenue versus having to wait for your AR days to complete. So what that's doing is letting you take action on that information a lot sooner. So having a combination, if you're not modeling contracts or not modeling an expected amount on your payers, what you're expecting to receive from your payers, then you're missing out on quite a significant chunk of patients. So it's important to incorporate that. The other thing I'd add is based on the level of effort you put into your cost accounting, if variability has been a key driver, then contribution margin needs to incorporate that variability as well. So there are a number of organizations that use variable direct cost as contribution margin, but there's some where not a lot of effort has been put into variability. They use direct cost. Again, ultimately, it's helping you solve what is the incremental cost per case, but typically that should be done on a variable direct cost basis.
That's a great clarification, Tushar. Thank you for that. And another audience member is wondering, is the security on the data analytics tool PKI based?
I don't know what that means. So we might have to follow up with this audience member. I'm not saying you understood what that meant.
No, I think that would be on your guys' side, and because
we will
it's a web-based thing. Yeah.
I will definitely follow up on that. So we can reach out separately to answer that question.
Excellent. And another question that an audience member is wondering is, do you have a data governance department?
At Maine Medical Center, I believe they're setting up one on the Maine health level, but they don't have one as of yet.
So you guys are driving. So just as far as definitions for different fields and ensuring people are using standard definitions, Stan, it's your department that's driving it?
Yeah, I mean, we have to continually remind people we are a finance-based system. So, all of our data is there because it's somehow related to finance. We do have the diagnosis codes and things like that, which can work in a clinical aspect, but they do have a financial component as well. So there's some things we can't do. If they're looking for orders written or time it takes to get an order done, that's something that we don't want to get into. And our dashboards are more financial than that.
But the key part of data governance that, again, data governance sounds very broad, but the key part of data governance is the focus on standardization. Are people using data in a similar manner, in a consistent manner, and are definitions of the data they're using consistent? Now, that could be done by a data governance committee. That could be enforced by the team that's providing the analytics. But where you guys leverage concepts around data governance is ensuring each service line is looking at the same metrics. The metrics were consistently defined for each service line so that no two service lines are coming up with two different answers for the same metric.
Correct. And then working also with our super users that are going out to the other hospitals to kind of teach them the pattern and things that we've established here.
Yep. Fantastic.
And Stan, do you use dashboards for monthly budget variances, in particular flex budget reporting?
So Strata has, I think, a wonderful module with budgeting. I don't know very much about it, but I believe they have dashboards over there where they measure their variances and stuff. But Tushar would know.
I can answer that. Absolutely, yes. Yep.
Great. And it looks like we have time for one more question today. An audience member is wondering, are you using any external data sources to augment surgical spine analysis to get detailed inventory info?
So I'm not sure I understand the question. Yeah, can you
Sure,
repeat it?
I will repeat the question, yes. Are you using any external data sources to augment surgical spine analysis to get detailed inventory info?
No, because Strata already has information at the charge level. So when we pull the data over from Epic, we actually already pull over the supply cost for each item used for each patient. So I think it's already at the most granular level it can be. And that's what we roll up when we're looking at quote spine surgery. We're taking all those charges and building those blocks together to come up with a final a supply cost and or a direct cost.
Yeah, and I think that's where the question comes up is a lot of systems use, to capture implants or supplies that were utilized in a case use external systems. With Epic, you're using one consistent system to the both. So Maine Medical gets the most granular information around what supply was used versus what they charged for, right? It's deeper than the charge master, so an external system is not required for that analysis.
Excellent. Thank you both for breaking down that question. And thanks to the audience for just a really great engaged conversation. And that is all the time we have for today. And I want to thank Tushar and Stan for their excellent presentation and Strata Decision Technology for sponsoring today's webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.
Thanks, everybody.